Welcome to the Leadership Puzzle. I'm so glad that you chose to join us in this episode where we explore the leadership puzzle piece of organizational acumen. Join us as we have a great conversation with Mike Moreland, the former Senior Vice President and CHRO of the Acute Care Unit of Providence Health.
I'm your host, Jeff Lupinacci, co-founder of Evolve HR Solutions. In this project, we're taking a journey to uncover the mysteries of leadership with some of the world's most accomplished leaders. In each episode, we discover the distinct insight from each of these great leaders, enabling us to refine our leadership skills and become more effective leaders. Piece by piece, together, we will assemble the leadership puzzle.
Hey, Mike, it is so great to have you on the Leadership Puzzle today. Thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. I was so honored that you asked me, and of course, always good to catch up with you. You know, you're one of my favorite folks, and so I just was so delighted to be able to just be a part of this. So thank you for inviting me.
Oh, well, I was really looking forward to this. I was thinking back on when you and I first met. It was a minute ago. We were both in human resources at Intel, and if I remember correctly, it was at a global leadership conference in Santa Clara.
I think that's right. Yep. And then we had some other good opportunities, a couple of them overseas, actually. I think we were in Singapore at one point together and some other places.
Yeah, what was really interesting about your career is you didn't start in HR at Intel.
No.
You were in operations. What prompted that move into HR?
That's actually a really great story. You remember back in the day. So I was in the systems manufacturing group, as you remember, and I was in DuPont, and I was the operations production manager for the systems manufacturing line, and team up there. So we were, doing desktop systems and so forth, and we did startup in '96. Shut down in '98, and then we did a restart in '99. And man, I will tell you that at that point, I was getting kind of tired of running a factory, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. Didn't really intend to go into human resources, even though my degree is in management. My undergrad's in management of human resources. And I went to one of the Intel Manufacturing Excellence conferences that we used to have, and I think they used to be in San Diego most usually. Usually that's where they were. And they had all of these great presentations by these people systems managers, and those were the sessions. It was about manufacturing excellence, and so there were a lot of sessions on all the cool work that was going on in the manufacturing process, a lot of process design stuff. But the ones that were standing room only were the ones that were people systems. It was amazing. Those were the ones that where everybody was flocking to, and so I went in there into a couple of those sessions, and there was some really cool work that they were doing. And I was really excited about that work. And so I came back to my systems manufacturing group because we didn't have a people systems manager role. And I was talking to our HR manager at the time, and I said, hey, everybody else is doing this cool work and everybody wants to do it. And how come we in systems manufacturing aren't doing some of this? And she's like, well, it's funny you said that. We're going to post a job next week. And if you're really that excited about it, then you should put your name in the hat. So we might be good for it. And so I did, and I got the job, and that's how I sort of made the transition. And a couple of years later, I ended up taking on the responsibility for not only people systems, but all of the HR functions for systems manufacturing.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I really appreciated about Intel. They really embrace the idea that if you have these core leadership skills, if you have these core characteristics, then moving in between functions or jobs was really encouraged.
Right. And we saw a lot of that in our Intel days, and many of some of us got those same opportunities to be able to transfer our skills in different areas. And so it was really it didn't feel as like it was a real hard right hand turn when I did it. It just seemed like it was just a natural transition because I think it was expected. People expected me to be successful if you're a good leader, right? And these just different outcomes, different goals that you're trying to drive toward. Yeah.
Right. So. Yeah, I know a number of finance or IT or supply chain folks like yourself, manufacturing that got to step into other roles. It would be something that I think other companies could be really benefit from if they broaden their horizons.
I totally agree with you. And the fact at Providence, that was one of the things we were trying to get folks to get to, be more open to, because, particularly in healthcare, where there's a certain segment where you need in healthcare to have very deep expertise, providing health. And so that tended to be sort of an overarching cultural thing that folks wanted everybody to be deep and narrow in what they do, and trying to get them to open up to some of the other places and spaces where that's not necessarily true. Certainly you want your physicians, to be highly specialized, right?
For
and
sure.
the technicians and so forth. So totally get that. But there are so many other functions where skills are, in fact, a lot more transferable than people think, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Speaking of healthcare, your second big jump in your career was almost 180 degree turn from high tech. Healthcare is a great career, but boy, it's a big difference. Tell us about what prompted you to leave the high tech and move your career into that healthcare world.
Well, it started, Jeff, as I was leading up to my third sabbatical at Intel. And I was working at the time for Patty Murray and Richard Taylor. And I remember Patty Murray was the SVP, for HR, and Richard was the VP of HR. And I remember being in Santa Clara with Patty and was talking to her about my sabbatical. And I just said, man, I don't know if I'm going to come back, and I'm just tired and I don't know what I want to do. And she's like, Mike, take your sabbatical, and just decompress, shut it down, and come back. When you come back, we could talk about it then. And she also said something very important to me, and it really, I think, helped me leave Intel and then transition. She's like, Mike, I know how you are wired, and you are wired differently than most of the leaders at Intel. So I understand why you're tired, because you come at it very differently than other people, than most of us do. And so, but you've been successful here. You can continue to be. You just got to decide if that's what you want to do. And whatever you decide, I'll support you. I came back from sabbatical, and we were doing some reductions in the shared services. And I was HR for HR at the time, and they actually allowed me to break the rules and eliminate my own job. And folks were trying to convince me not to do that. And Patty jumped in and was like, no, this is what Mike wants to do. I supported he, and I've talked about this. So that put me on a path to say I need to be someplace where I can probably be my whole self. And I didn't really expect it in healthcare, but I had, during the time I was off from Intel and before I came to Providence, I was off for 13 months before I went to go work for a law firm, which I loved. It was a small local law firm, and it had multiple sites geographically, but it was really good to be there. But the thing I decided in that 13 months that I was off before I came back to work was I'm going to stay in HR. Because I could have easily gone back to operations, but I wanted to stay in HR because I thought that would give me the best opportunity to transition industries. Because HR really, there's so many similarities, because people are people, organizations are organizations, and some of the things that folks are doing in HR are very, very similar, just a different context. Right. And I had made a decision when I left Intel. I was like, man, 23 years was enough. That was enough for me, And a lot of folks want to, there's still folks that I talk to that have been there 30 plus years, 40 years, and good on them. It just wasn't something I wanted to do. And then the healthcare opportunity came around, and I wasn't so sure about it, but I had this really incredible divine call to go there, and so I went, and it was really, really one of the best things I've ever did, actually.
That's great. And just so our listeners know, Intel every 7 years would give an employee 2 months paid sabbatical, time off. You shut down, you gave your work over. And so the fact that you got to 3 is pretty amazing there. And certainly Patty Murray, as a CHRO of Intel at the time, showed some real leadership in really hearing what was, in your heart and your kind of passion, and that good for her to identify that and encourage you to do something that was going to bring you life in your next role.
That's right. I will never forget it. I've been always appreciative. That's why I mention her and that story as often as I can, because I'm always grateful for her, to her for that.
That's great. Yeah. That's great. So that's a great transition in terms of leadership, and we want to dig into your leadership puzzle. This project is really about exploring the different pieces that leaders put together to create that unique picture of themselves, and so really interested in is there a particular leadership characteristic that has allowed you to transition from operations to HR, from high tech to healthcare? Said another way, what has allowed you to be successful as you've taken some of these seemingly very, very different kinds of opportunities?
Yeah, I think that for me, I didn't realize it at the time, but starting at Intel, I started as a manufacturing test operator back in 1983. And I think coming up through the ranks, starting at the bottom and coming up through the ranks really served me well. And I think being in operations also served me incredibly well over the time, because I had the opportunity, particularly in systems manufacturing, to understand, even though it was a part of Intel that had a really great business in the microprocessor space, the systems manufacturing group was in a low margin business. And so it's super competitive, worldwide and so forth. And so I learned a lot about those kinds of things. And then I was also a part of a group in the mid 80s called the Personal Computer Enhancement Operation. And in that group, that was when, right after Intel had made the switch to really commit the whole organization on the microprocessors. And what we were doing in Personal Computer Enhancement Operation, it was really the first foray of Intel into the retail space. And so we were actually selling accelerator cards and memory cards for personal computers to help like an 8086 personal computer become a 286 personal computer, those kinds of things. And the goal of that organization was to make the personal computer the business platform of the future, right? And so that was an incredible journey. And so it was a startup that was inside of Intel. So it had the startup mentality, which was cool. It was also one of those things where, okay, you guys can make a run of this. And if it doesn't go, if there's jobs for you to come back to Intel, good. Otherwise, thanks for playing, And so it was a risk, but it was one that was well worth taking. And so I started off in systems manufacturing, and I went to personal computer enhancement operation, and then ultimately came back to systems manufacturing after I had that stint. But man, I learned so much about the customers and what it meant to serve customers, quality. I learned really about the whole retail, the whole chain, starting from what an OEM or original equipment manufacturer does versus, suppliers and so forth. And I just learned so much about all of those different elements that I think were critical for me to understand business and how business works. Sure. And so that was a really important factor for me. And then by the time I got to HR, I think being able to translate that business acumen and apply it to HR made me a really strong HR player, because the HR stuff was stuff I knew and it was almost intrinsic to my being, and I had gone to school for it, but I brought into it all of these other capabilities and leadership experiences that I think really helped me become a much better HR leader than I probably would have been otherwise.
Yeah, that business acumen, you hit it, is so important for leaders, and especially HR leaders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. If that were the one thing I would say to HR leaders is, you have to, understand the business and understand the operations and how those things work. It's really important for us to do that, because that is the point of HR. We have to make sure that the point of HR is to help the organization achieve its strategic intent. And human resources are what we're trying to do. But you got to understand, what the business strategies are and what the strategic intent is. and then make sure that what we're doing aligns and helps facilitate that. So,
yeah, it's. I'd like your opinion on this. There's a lot of HR leaders that complain that they don't have a seat at the table. Do you think it has something to do with the business acumen?
I do. I think it has something to do with the business acumen, and I also and some of an operational strength as well. I mean, understanding again how the operations actually work is really critical to being able to talk the language that your other leaders are talking. And what I would say is that it's the best realization I have come to as an HR leader is that helping the organization understand that business strategy is HR strategy and HR strategy is business strategy, and understanding that. And so I think you have to be good at the basics. That is true, so we've got to be good at the blocking and tackling of HR, talent acquisition, compensation, benefits, all of those kinds of things. We have to be really employee relations. We have to be really good at those things, but there's always room for improvement in those areas. And as you progress as an HR leader, you should begin to spend less and less time on those operational things, making sure they're shored up. But you have to make sure that you spend time understanding the business and being and when you understand the business, you're then able to contribute. The other thing I would say is that that for me, another big learning is that sometimes business acumen kind of becomes sort of esoteric, and we've talked about that for a lot, with HR leaders. And one of the best ways I would describe it is understand how your organization creates value. Mm-hmm. This is about value creation and how we as an organization, how HR can either accelerate or decelerate the creation of value in the organization. Right? And make sure that you're putting that in the forefront of what you do and spending more time understanding and thinking about that and contributing to the leadership in that way.
So how, if you were to sit down with your younger, self or, maybe want to be HR leaders, what would that look like? What does that value, that tangible value look like from an HR leader to the business?
Yeah. So for me, you sit down and you say, the first thing that we always tell folks is understand how your organization gets paid. Follow the money. First and foremost, understand how the money works, because that's really how you help folks understand that you understand. You know what I mean? Because the business that we're in. And so understand how the money works would be first and foremost, and then understand how that value is ultimately created for customers. And so let's just take healthcare for an example. It's a understanding, and for me, it was always important to keep our eye on the ball, that the things that we're doing in HR is in service of all the frontline folks who are delivering care to the communities and making sure that we are providing the best care to those communities. That is the value that we're creating. Now, in healthcare, there's a big move to, from a business perspective to understand value creation from a fee-for-service perspective, moving toward a value-based, kind of a thing where you get paid based on the value that you actually give, and so versed on whether if I get paid based on whether I see you or not. If I see you, I get paid, and so that there's a whole move in healthcare to move away from fee-for-service, to being more value-based in terms of how the compensation model works. And so that's a big step from an HR organization to say, how do we help the organization shift from a business model that has this and has a different, and at the same time, like for example, in healthcare, the time I was in healthcare, we went from about mid 40s, like 42 or 43% of our compensation was from payers that were like retail payers, right? So these are, or commercial business, right? And over time, the pendulum has started to swing, and more of the business was being paid for by Medicare and Medicaid. And so Medicare, I think, paid pretty much 50 cents on the dollar, for the cost, for the cost of care. Medicaid was about 30 cents on the dollar for the cost of care. So that means that as the more and more Medicaid and Medicare that you're taking that you were taking in, and less commercial business you were getting, then that creates a different operating model, which then tells us that we have to do something different organizationally and from a people perspective in order to be competitive.
Yeah, got it.
But if you don't understand that, then you can't help the organization.
Right. Okay.
Right.
No,
I hope that's a good example.
Yeah. No, it's a great example. So for any HR professional, and I think it also pertains to any other kind of support function of a business, whether it's finance or IT or R&D. It's understanding the business enough to know how your product or service is helping support the growth of the business.
Right. That's right. Because again, HR strategy is business strategy and vice versa. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And so, for example, just going back to healthcare, there's a number of occasions where organizations have decided that we need to build a new tower, a new 450 bed tower.
Right.
Well, and that sounds great, but to make the assumption that we can actually staff that, without doing a complete workforce analysis and understanding what it's going to take from a workforce, standpoint to really ramp that up, that's a different question. And if you understand it, it might take you 3 years to be able to staff all 450 of those beds. It may change the decision that you make in terms of the ROI, because that's definitely going to affect that, whatever ROI or pro forma you've done on that, or business analysis you've done on that new tower. So those are the kinds of contributions that I think we can make and help our organizations make better business decisions.
You bring up recruiting in the healthcare, and I think COVID caused the healthcare industry to be one of the hardest hit in terms of talent.
Absolutely.
And you lived through that. So what and I don't know that we've ever recovered from that in terms of healthcare with nurses shortage and doctors and whatnot. Any wisdom that you have for the listeners on how to find and attract and retain that talent during difficult times, especially?
Yeah. Well, Jeff, let me just first back up a little bit to say we saw this particular workforce crisis, as we started to call it at Providence. We saw this coming. We saw the shortage of nurses and the shortage of healthcare professionals coming. It was about 20 years ago. We started the data started to roll in, and just looking at the aging of the actual workforce and the population in the U.S. versus the number of people graduating from nursing school and from medical school and so forth. We saw that there was going to be a cliff coming. What COVID did was exacerbate and accelerate that cliff, right? And so what I'm saying is that the data was already there based on the demographic shifts, right? And so, the demographic shift began to shift to different populations too. So there's other minority groups that began to become more and more prevalent in the United States, and those folks were not necessarily entering into healthcare at the same rate to be able to care for the populations that as the population changes. And so, the thing that I would say to our HR colleagues out in the field is that one of the things that we came to is that, first of all, helping our organization understand it is, in fact, a workforce crisis. And we have to begin to do things differently. And I had to say on many occasions when folks were telling me about all the problems in talent acquisition, I had to tell them, we will work on those, we will fix those, but you will not be able to hire. We will not be able to hire our way to success.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. And there's two things that we needed to do. First of all, we needed to retain the talent. So we had to shift our focus from not just hiring to what it means to retain folks, because every person counts. And so one of the things we focused on a lot was where's our retention and what are we doing about, and understanding as an HR professional, what are the levers that you need to employ that really help you retain employees. And that's a place where, because folks like, I don't know what to do. Many of the leaders don't know what to do. Because just like at Intel, many of them were professionals in their own right, who just happened to now become managers. They were,
Right.
they were nurses before, right? They never learned this. And so they're like, what do we do? And that's an opportunity for us to say, here's where we are, because we also know in HR that the cost of turnover, we know the data on the cost of turnover, and that's,
Sure.
we can calculate that. And so being able to bring that to the table and understand what that means is super important. So focus on retention is the first thing I'd say. The second thing I would encourage our HR colleagues to do is workforce planning and talent pipeline creation and development. So getting out there and understanding how do you begin to partner with universities, community-based organizations, and get more people coming into the healthcare profession, and understanding the data in terms of where people are graduating, how many are graduating, and helping, especially from a healthcare perspective, how do we get more than our fair share, in the short term, right?
Right.
And the key to that is really having a great organizational culture and focusing on retention. Those kinds of things. And so that's where this old notion of great place to work, it really bears fruit, is that at the end of the day, if your turnover numbers are going down and you have a great value proposition for your employees, then they will stay.
Yeah.
Especially when it's super competitive out there. And oftentimes we go quickly to pay. The problem is pay, right? Sometimes it is. And in healthcare, it got to be because, as one of my colleagues used to say, when Elsewhere General is offering you $5 more an hour, it's tough, to turn that down. So you still have to be competitive from a pay perspective, but there's more to it than that. And making sure that you begin to build that workforce. And from a talent pipeline perspective, taking your current and existing employees and saying, how do I develop them into different roles that may be applicable to the organization, because these are folks that are already here, right?
Yeah.
And that's where things like workforce development, internal workforce development, or things like succession planning, those are really important levers to the talent pipeline, right?
Yeah, once you get pay off the table, where from a distraction, then you can focus on development. What are their passions? Where do they want to see their career going, and doing the appropriate training and rotations, and like you did, you jumped into a different function altogether.
Right.
So that's good.
Yeah.
Mike, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you is your humility. I think you have this strength that as a leader that I think comes from your humility. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I think that is very fair to say, and it's taken me a while to sort of get centered down on that being okay as a leader, to be honest, because much of what we see in leadership doesn't operate or come from that space of humility,
Right.
And so, but that's kind of who I am, and that's how I'm wired. That in my outside life, I'm an associate pastor. I'm a deep man of faith, and being a Christian, I follow Christ, and he was the epitome of humility. And so understanding that from that lens was super important to say, I want to be more like him, which by definition is what it means to be a Christian, right?
Yeah.
To be more Christ-like. The other thing where it comes from, Jeff, is honestly, I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and in the automotive industry, and my folks were working people. These were folks that, they worked at the plant, or my mom was a nurse, and these were folks who just went to work every day. They, there was none of this keeping up with the Joneses. They just wanted to do good work, provide for their families, go on vacation 2 weeks of the year, and buy a new car every once in a while. It was those kinds of folks. And so the frontline folks, as an HR leader and as a leader generally, I've always been much more likely to be talking to frontline workers as I am to the CEO or the CFO or anybody in the C-suite, because the frontline folks, them are my people. What I mean? Those are the folks I grew up around, and I respect the most and love the most. And I consider myself, whatever level that I'm on, that's still who I am. I'm just a working class dude from Ohio,
Nice.
who's had the
Nice.
opportunity to have a wonderful career and been given opportunities that many others haven't been given. And I'm thankful for that,
Great. So do you think that humility is an important leadership puzzle piece, or is it just a nice to have with leaders? What's your perspective on that?
So my perspective is that it is a key ingredient, because I don't think you can lead effectively without getting yourself out of the way long enough to be able to fully embrace the folks that are working with you or for you, if that's, if you can say that,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so that, I believe it's critical. And I think it's where, things like emotional intelligence and some of the things that we've brought forward in recent years is really getting at being able to understand oneself and being willing to humble yourself to be able to adjust to help other people. So I would say yes. I think others would say no. And I think just one clarification too, one of the places where I struggled was making sure that my humility wasn't false humility.
Yeah, sure.
And understanding who I am, whose I am, and being able to walk in that humility, but with authority.
Sure.
Yeah. And along the way, there are some folks who come from a different, maybe the other side of the spectrum that are more arrogant, who typically they feel like those of us who walk in humility can be taken advantage of. And some folks have tried it over the years, and to their peril. You know what I mean? Because that's a place that I'm coming from, and I start from the place of humility. But as the folks would say, don't get it twisted. I still am a leader here, and I know what I think. And I might not be the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I can still cut you if I need to.
Sure.
But understanding that you have the authority, and that the authority doesn't need to be always on display or demonstrated, allows you to be able to work with a much broader set of people and include them as a part of your thinking and your thought process, and whatever decision you make or need to make, you got more people with you in that regard.
Yeah.
And so, but if you don't operate with the appropriate amount of humility, the reason why I think it's critical is that oftentimes folks who come from that really extreme polar opposite, I think they end up getting from people what they think they want to hear. Yeah. And they don't always hear the truth. And when you operate with humility, I think people are more likely to tell you and be honest and give you the truth. And that's always served me incredibly well.
No, that's great. Yeah, it is interesting if you're too self-focused, too arrogant, the people that are surrounding you tend to, as you said, they tell you what they think you want to hear. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've seen CEO after CEO get into real ethical dilemmas because they haven't built that relationship and that trust and humility with their teams that could be open and honest with them.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Again, it's to your peril, and so that doesn't mean that you have to be milk toast or the doormat. It just simply means that you esteem others, just as yourself, and in some cases more than yourself. Depending on the situation. That's all that means. And when you actually do esteem others, it's an amazing thing that happens in an organization, and in whether it's a department or a division, whether it's a team of 5 or a team of 500. It's amazing the culture that creates in a positive way.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Because you were in healthcare during COVID, you saw firsthand the need for resilience and grit through some significantantly challenging situations.
Yeah.
But I know you've been through other challenging situations as leaders. What advice would you give C-suite leaders or wannabe C-suite leaders on how to overcome those challenging leadership situations? What do they need to bring to the table so that they can be successful in that environment?
Yeah, it's going to sound really simple to say, but it's very hard to do, Jeff. But you have to be in a leader, especially in those kinds of situations. You got to really be looking to do the right thing. And do the right thing considering as many of your stakeholders and constituents as you possibly can. Right. You know, and that is really important. And sometimes it may seem counter to some of the other business goals that you have. I mean, for example, during COVID, one of the things we spent a good chunk of money as a Providence early on in the first 3 or 4 months with backup childcare. I want to say it was like $14 to $15 million, because all of a sudden, many of our caregivers, their backup childcare was gone. You know what I mean? And those folks were, and in some cases we were giving it to them, or, giving it to them so they could pay their, grandma or auntie or somebody else to come, or uncle to come watch their kids, because and we needed them to come to work. And so is that something that you want to do long term? No. But as we wrestled with that, we said, this is something that we can do to help our employees in a very tangible way. Yes, it's expensive, but to not do it would be the wrong thing to do. And it would, and ultimately would hurt the organization. But the key is to do the right thing, Jeff, and be looking to do the right thing. I will give Providence a lot of credit for doing that and being in that space during that time. And we did a lot of things that may have been, sort of counter to what we would normally do. Yep. But we were saying, what can we do? And sometimes, you have to do things in a time-bound perspective, because some things are expensive. Sure. You can't do them for always. But you got to figure out ways to be able to do what you need to do, and see who does it help, who does it hurt, those kinds of things. And and I think that's core to one of my takeaways from Providence was this relative to doing the right thing. They had this whole process that wasn't employed on a routine basis, but from time to time, they would employ a process called an ethical discernment. And what that means is that you say, here's the business decision that we want to make, but is it the right thing to do when we consider all of our constituents? Right. And so they would bring different stakeholders in and different leaders in and, employees in. And it was a whole process that you went through. But it was, just because this is the right business thing to do doesn't necessarily mean it's the right thing to do. Sure. Right. And so, and for me, that was the sort of the epitome of what I've experienced from a work perspective that really helps hone in on this notion of doing the right thing. Yeah. No, that's good. I mean, doing the right thing is going to be applicable anywhere. I mean, Intel, it was a big thing at Intel too. Right. You got to do the right thing. Do the right thing, right? And take ownership for doing the right thing, right? You see problem, solve problem, right? Until somebody else takes it, right? Exactly. That's how we learned it, right? So. Yeah, that assumed responsibility until you find the right person. So that's, these are some just good leadership principles that I think are lost in a lot of the world today. I totally agree with you. Well, great. That you really gave us some good leadership puzzles. Now let's have a little bit of fun. We're going to go to the lightning round. Oh, okay. So I love superheroes. I grew up on comics. So if you had one superpower that you could have, what would it be? I'm not sure what superhero it would be attributed to, but I will tell you that one of the superpowers that I've tried to create in myself was this ability to listen. I think Superman had the X-ray vision, and I think I would like to just have X-ray listening skills, right? To really just listen well. I think has been really key, for me and my success over the years. That would be something that I would say would be a superpower I would want. I don't want to hear people stop, because nobody wants to hear that. Nice. What's the best meal you've ever had in your life? Man, I was thinking about this one, and there's like so many to choose from. One of my best friends and I, we were driving from Ohio to Portland, and our car broke down in Des Moines, Iowa. And fortunately, he had godparents that lived in Des Moines. And so while the car was getting fixed for a couple of days, we stayed with them. And when we were about to leave, this is Iowa. This is the heartland. Man, they cooked up some steaks on the grill, and we had corn and just, I think, mashed potatoes. And Jeff, I got to tell you, I think that was the best meal I've had in ever, because at that point, I was 22 years old and a struggling student, college student, and somebody sent some steaks like that in front of me, and this is the heartland. That's some good beef right there,
Yeah, for sure.
And some great corn. In that
yeah.
area.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was that's one that was particularly memorable because it was so good, and we appreciated it so much because pretty much the whole way from Des Moines all the way to Portland, it was pretty much McDonald's and other places along the way, right? So
yeah, it's amazing.
It was awesome. Yeah,
it really is amazing how food tastes better when there's a experience associated with it.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
All right, so you're well traveled. What's the most exciting place that you've traveled to?
Being able to, I had my middle daughter, one of our daughters, actually did a teaching assignment in Nicaragua. Oh. And I don't know that I would have ever gone to Central America had it not been for her being in Nicaragua. And so my wife and I and our kids have gone to Nicaragua and Costa Rica, and just loved it. It was just great. They're very different. Costa Rica is a lot more developed, and Nicaragua not as much. But in many ways, we enjoyed Nicaragua just because it was more not as westernized. It was just you got a chance to see the beauty of the country and got a chance to go to local places a lot more and interact with locals, because that's just the way it is. And so and just great beaches and great weather and great food, and lots of good things lots of fun things to do. So that's probably the best, for me.
No, that's great. That's great. Mm-hmm. Well, we both lived in Portland. You still live there.
Yeah.
And I think it is, the U.S. one of the U.S.'s most beautiful places with mountains and the forests and everything. If you were to tell our listeners who were going to visit Portland, what is your favorite tourist attraction? Where would you tell someone to go visit?
Oh, without hesitation, the Oregon coast. Without hesitation. And I know that I would have, you always have to warn people that, no, this isn't the, go swimming and surfing beach. You know what I mean? It is the aesthetic beauty, kind of a beach. And I just don't think there's anything more beautiful than the Oregon coast and Oregon beaches. And, those of us in Oregon know that when you go down there, no matter what time of year it is, you got to layer because you just never know, But man, in terms of walking on the beach and just being able to, for me, just really, sit back and enjoy the beauty of the creation is just awesome.
We talk about puzzle pieces, really being leadership and unique attributes. If we were to ask your team, if we were to ask your team what unique puzzle piece attribute you bring to the team, what would they tell us?
I think, I should say I think. I'm not sure if they would use this word, but I would say wisdom. And with the last 3 years, the last 4 or 5 years at Providence, as I was interacting with lots of different people, especially other leaders, they were fond of saying, Mike, we need you to be in the meeting because we need the voice of reason.
That's great.
So that, and I would call that wisdom, and it's God-given, and I'm thankful for it, But yeah, I think that's what they would say, or something awesome. Like that, because I try to always, again, listen well to all voices and then see if there's a path we can chart that's the most beneficial to the most people.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Right. Well, I always like to give my guests a chance to tell the listeners about something that's important to them. I know you have a couple of projects that maybe you'd like to share.
Yeah. So As you know, I'm a teaching pastor at Mount Olivet Baptist Church. So shout out to MOBC in Portland, Oregon, and so just really that's been a big part of my life since we've been a part of this church since 2005. We've always been active in all the churches wherever we've been, but we've been here since 2005. My wife and I and our children. And so being a teaching pastor there is one of my passions. And so I do a lot of teaching of Bible study and other classes. And then I also preach occasionally and so forth. And so that's something that I'm passionate about, and because it's how I live my life,
Yep.
And so, but I will say that I've tried to live my life in such a way that my faith translates into my professional work. And so, yeah, so I'm also super passionate about being I'm the chair of the board of Warner Pacific University, and that's a local university here in Portland, Oregon. It's in Southeast Portland, and we are Christ-centered and have a liberal arts core, but we have all kinds of degree programs with business and so forth. I actually got my master's degree from Warner Pacific, and
Right.
my son graduated. Our son graduated from Warner Pacific. I have a niece that graduated from Warner Pacific, a nephew that graduated from Warner Pacific. And what's interesting about Warner Pacific is that it's a private school, that has been historically over the years white, and over the last 15 years, we actually now have over 60% of our students are students of color. And
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so we are officially minority serving, officially Hispanic serving organization. Now
great.
we've just been designated as officially Asia Pacific Islander Native American serving. And so it's just been really cool to say, how do we bring this Christ-centered professional education to students of color and help change the trajectory of many of the students' lives that we are serving. And so it's just really super. I'm really passionate about that, and serving on the board. It's a labor of love. It's a labor, but it's a labor of love. So, and then, just on the side, my wife and I, she's got her own consulting business, and she and I have been talking about maybe starting up a foundation, and we're just really starting in the early stages of how do we start a foundation that contributes to helping Christian people really do business with one another, particularly communities of color. And how do we do that without them having to go through the normal systems, where they have to go through all the hoops and may or may not get it, and but be from a kingdom of God mindset. And how do we, raise dollars that we can give to some of these folks to help them really facilitate what their God-given gifts and talents are. And so that's something that's been on our heart for a while, and we're going to see if we can actualize that. So,
that's great. Well, if you wanna, see Mike preach, you can go to www.mountolivet.com, and
my goodness.
so I think he has some YouTubes out there too. So well, thanks, Mike. I have one last question for you. What advice would you give our listeners who really want to implement a leadership strategy to grow their leadership capabilities? Whether they're leading a small team or a large team. You've led both. What advice would you give them?
The best advice I would give is that be a continuous learner. Be a continuous learner. Know your craft, right? Be good at your craft, but always, especially now where there's so many opportunities to grow and to learn, and information is coming and changing, staying on top of those kinds of things, but investing in yourself and investing in others, and that's the thing about your team. One of the best things I've ever done is invest in other leaders and in other people. And so, and you do that best by first demonstrating it yourself, right? So it can always be learning, and whether it's academics or whether it's just reading journal articles or, whatever it might be, because that really facilitates growth. Take feedback well, and because they're, especially from folks who care about you, they're giving you really good feedback and advice that will help you continue to grow.
Right.
And so sometimes we don't always like to hear it,
Right.
but
Yeah, for sure.
but sometimes it's good for us, and so that's part of the growth. And so always be growing and learning is what I would say.
Awesome. Well, Mike, it was so much fun just sitting and having a conversation with you today. I really appreciate you joining us on the Leadership Puzzle.
Oh, it's been my pleasure. Absolutely. It's always good to talk to you, man.
Yeah, same here. Well, hopefully you'll come back and again, thanks so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I really enjoyed my conversation with Mike and the wisdom that he has over a lifetime as a CHRO. I especially appreciated the wisdom that he shared around taking time to understand the organization and how that can be used to leverage gaining a seat at the table. You know, it would really help us if you shared this podcast and the other podcasts as well with your friends and encourage them to listen to find out their leadership puzzle piece. Also, you can follow us on all of the social platforms at The Leadership Puzzle. Be sure to join us next time when the tables get turned and I get asked the questions around what my leadership puzzle piece is. So we'll see you next time.